If I could get to know your name, oh, that was loud, then I would like to move in just a little bit closer. But old dogs have started barking outside. All I know, it sends me, you look like you like to find. Open up your loving heart, watch out, here I come. Why is it always so hot in my house? Like, I mean, to be fair, it was useful when it were like freezing outside, but now the summer's starting to rear its ugly head. I do like the summer, I just don't like being hot. So, you know, what is the truth? It's like the hottest day of the year and we've got the tumble dryer on downstairs, so I'm melting. Hello everybody, it is me, Pete Burns, and I am here once again with another visual treat for you to feast your eyes and your ears upon. I am very, very hot, so as always, I mean, there's always a chance that my eyebrows are going to lift anyway, because turns out I'm not great at concealing them with just the Pritt stick. But if they do start to lift anymore, you know, just don't say oh, as always. So today, what are we doing, I hear you ask? Today we're going to do another Queer Histories about Pete Burns, which was the reason for the song earlier, like 2 seconds ago probably. So I've been watching Luxaria recently, who has been like doing a sort of a watch along, I guess, of Pete Burns' PR, I think it's called. Basically it's like a reality TV show with Pete Burns, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting person. I'm gonna like do my next Queer Histories about him. So I've done a little bit of research with this one. So I've done a lot of like watching of interviews, and I've done like lots of like, what's the word, what am I looking for? I've done some like reading on it online as well, but there's not like a great deal like actually written down about him, so it's quite interesting really. I mean, he was quite a private individual, so I think like that kind of lends itself quite well to that like kind of side of him. But yeah, I've done a lot of like watching of videos and stuff, which is where I've got the majority of my information from today. So, you know, and I do know that he were like a bit of a like wind-up merchant in some ways, just from like, you know, interviews with friends and stuff. So if any of it is wrong, I've like seen him say it, but you know, it might be in taking the mic. We don't know. We're never too sure, but I'm gonna give it a whirl anyway. Sorry, so the name of the programme is actually Pete's PA, not Pete's PR, because, I mean, is that the same thing? Personal representative and a personal assistant may be different, actually, yeah. Seems like it would be different. I'm just first of all going to double check that these are actually dried. I mean, they feel as if they're as good as they're ever going to be. I just spat all over my my shiny makeup case, so that's humbling. So Pete Burns, Peter Elizabeth Burns. Pete Burns was born on the 5th of August 1959 in Cheshire. So that's a place in England. I believe it's fairly close to Liverpool, although, you know, my geography is not fab, so if I'm wrong then I'm sorry about that. He was born to his mother, who was called, and get ready for this because it's a fucking long one, so his mother was called Evelina Maria Bettina Quittner von Hudeck. So she was a German lady. In an interview that I watched with him, he said that she was a baroness and that she'd like, I think he said that she'd worked in film in Germany. So she like knew a lot about like makeup and like prosthetics and things. And he said that she really kind of taught him like a lot of his knowledge on, you know, obviously the art of transformation. So he said in his autobiography, which was called Freak Unique, that his mother had fled Germany during the Nazi occupation, and that she'd moved to Vienna to obviously escape that because her father was Jewish. While she was in Vienna, she met his father, who was a Liverpudlian soldier called Francis Burns, and they met at a dance. He did also have an older brother, although he said that like they didn't really sort of speak very much, but they enjoyed listening to music together, and I think his brother also had like aspirations to sort of be in the music industry as well. From what I've kind of heard and read, his mother did have quite a lot of issues with like mental health and like struggles with that, but he did say that, you know, it never sort of like impinged upon his relationship with her. Like he felt that she was like a really, really good mum, which is great, because obviously his mum was German, he spoke German, for quite a long time. It's not very clear, to be fair, but it seems like that's all that he spoke until he was aged 5. I could be wrong with that one, so you know. But he like came under fire from like other young children, and like because obviously like there was a lot of like anti-German rhetoric, wasn't there, after the war and things. Apparently people were like shouting like Heil Hitler and stuff like at his window when he was like 5 years old, which is horrendous, isn't it? But as we know, people are quite oftentimes horrendous. His mum would often sort of keep him off of school and like, you know, like keep him in the house, and he said that like because he didn't really know any different, like that didn't really bother him, like that was just his childhood and he was like happy with that. He said that like they'd sort of build their own like little world to live in, like him and his mum, and that she'd kind of taught him how to go inside his mind to, I guess, like to sort of entertain himself and to escape from like bad things that were going on. I don't know, it seems quite nice to me in a way. I mean, obviously, like, I don't know, it's hard to say, isn't it? But I don't think that like it's a bad thing teaching your child like a coping mechanism, really. I think, you know, we all need them. I never mentioned, actually, I'm going to try and do some like Pete Burns inspired makeup, so we'll see what happens with it. If it goes wrong, then, you know, you'll probably be able to see that happening, but let's just keep our fingers crossed for me. Hopes and prayers and all that. What did his nose look like? Yeah, I know he had like a teeny tiny little pinched nose. Is this going to be too much contour? I'm really getting rid of that double chin today, aren't I? He was actually thrown out of school at the age of 13 because he violated the dress code, and he said that he turned up to school one day with like shaved eyebrows and bright red hair and like one big earring. I also heard in an interview that he gave, this looks wild, that he had his nose pierced, I think at a similar sort of time, so maybe that was the big earring. And like obviously that was like a big deal at the time. I mean, he does say in that interview as well, like, you know, people wander around with everything pierced these days, like everybody's got a nose piercing, but at the time it was like quite taboo that he had that. But whilst he was sort of an up and coming star, Pete worked at a record shop in Liverpool which was called Probe Records, and whilst there he got a very like big reputation for kind of not being the most sort of approachable shop assistant in the world, I guess. People sort of came to the till with records that he didn't approve of. He'd be like, that's shit, and then he'd like throw the record at him and stuff. There's lots of stories like that about him. So I think a lot of people were kind of quite scared to go to the shop when they knew that Pete were on. Although his kind of style was obviously very, very punk, his favourite sort of music and his main inspirations were people like Sylvester, so that kind of like very disco sort of music from the 70s. And he said, you know, even though like there was a punk movement, he didn't really sort of subscribe to that, and his main sort of interests were kind of in creating that same sort of music style as Sylvester. He even said, you know, like that he was really trying to sort of copy them, and that he felt like his music was sort of like a pale imitation of that, really, because he had like such a admiration for that music. In 1980 he married a lady that was called Lynn Collette, and he met her whilst they were both working in a salon together. With Pete's sort of sexuality, it's not really very clear kind of how he did identify, but you know, he was married to a woman and he was married to her for quite a while as well. I think it was up until 2006 sort of time. I don't know kind of what their relationship really was. Again, like I said earlier in the video, he was a very, very private person in terms of his actual personal life, so he kind of didn't really, it wasn't very clear what was going on with that. But I do know obviously like he had a partner later on, so I don't know if maybe, I think from what I can recall, I'm pretty sure that they did remain friends. So I mean, I guess, you know, that's good. In terms of his music, he first appeared in a punk band that was called the Mystery Girls. So they only lasted for one performance, and then they quickly disbanded. He was then in another band that was called Nightmares in Wax, and eventually, after sort of replacing several members, they became Dead or Alive, which is the band that Pete had his biggest sort of hit with, which was You Spin Me Right Round Like a Record Baby, right round, round, round. Is this looking anything like what his face looks like? Because I don't think my skills are not quite coming up to scratch here, are they? But we're gonna, you know, continue on. And God does give his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, doesn't he? The song You Spin Me Right Round was produced by Stockacre and Waterman, I believe they're called. He refers to them as Saw quite a lot, but it's, you know, like Pete Waterman. He used to do the, I think it was it Pop Idol, in fact, that he did? I don't think he did X Factor. But yeah, they were kind of like a real powerhouse. Dead or Alive with You Spin Me Right Round, they were kind of like their first real success. And the music was written by the band, from what sort of Peter said in interviews. But then, obviously, because like they had a taste of that kind of success, it's, well, according to Pete anyway, it looks as though they sort of realised that they could do that themselves. So like they could get all of the sort of songwriting and the production done in-house between them, and then they could get like all the royalties basically. From what, again, Peter said, they seem to kind of just leave them sort of twirling in the wind, because they realised that, you know, they could get more money by heavily producing another artist's sort of catalogue. So, you know, they worked with people like Bananarama and Kylie and lots of other people. They sort of really did that whole manufactured pop kind of thing, which, I mean, Pete Burns is obviously was not a manufactured sort of pop star, and he said that like he really did kind of struggle with the whole kind of industry side of things, I guess. So like he struggled with the idea of like somebody constantly wanting to hear like versions of records that he was working on, you know, like he preferred to sort of make the record and get it like as perfect to him as it sort of could be, and then like play it for people, whereas like in the music industry it seems like people want to like hear it as you go in, so that obviously didn't gel very well for him. But then from a documentary that I have watched about kind of Pete Burns and things, and you know, Pete Waterman, sorry, he was on there, and you know, he sort of couldn't really sing Pete Burns's praises enough, so I don't really know what the relationship was kind of like. I'm pretty sure that he said that he was like a son to him as well at one point in that documentary that I watched, and I was like, that's interesting, because it seems like from what Pete had said, it didn't seem like there was very much love lost. But again, another thing that Pete sort of didn't enjoy about the whole sort of like making music and being a pop star side of things was that, you know, once he'd made the music and it was a big hit, he had to then like go on and promote it, because in his head he was like, you know, it's a hit already, why do I need to go out and promote the music if it's already doing so well anyway? So he kind of said that like he wouldn't do as many appearances, you know, he didn't like show up on TV shows as much. Bless me. All that air spun really gets up your nose. He just like sort of didn't really subscribe to that side of things, so he wouldn't kind of do that many interviews, that many sort of appearances, like performing the tracks, which was obviously like a problem for his record label. Regardless, you know, You Spin Me Right Round was a global success, just largely because like it was, well, at least from what he said, it was because it was something that you could kind of dance to in the club and just enjoy yourself to. So the fact that it was such a huge commercial success was just because of how good the record was. I mean, that's very, very impressive really, isn't it? Especially when you kind of think about how much sort of press there is around like a really successful artist now, you know, like they're just constantly touring like in interviews. And Pete kind of, I mean, he did perform, like there's tons of videos of him performing on stage, but he didn't want to kind of go on a world tour. He felt like that wouldn't sort of give the fans like the best experience, because, you know, he'd be tired trying to perform for them, and then, you know, like they just wouldn't see like him at his best, so he just didn't really want to sort of even entertain that side of things, which is very impressive really. I mean, I think like a lot of musicians probably get into being a recording artist because they want the fame, whereas it seems like Pete Burns was very interested in the music side of things. You've got to like admire people with like artistic integrity. He ended up actually moving to Japan for quite a long time in the 90s from what I can sort of tell, and he was very successful over there. Again, like this kind of was the move for him, I guess, because he didn't speak Japanese, at least not like well enough to carry an interview. So it meant that he kind of got away from that sort of obligation to, you know, to really be in like the press and in the public eye. So that kind of suited him just fine. He could make his music and enjoy his life, I guess. The other thing that like you do think of when you think of Pete Burns is the fashion side of things and like the image that he had. When he released You Spin Me Right Round with his first sort of check from that, he went and got his nose done, and when he woke up from the procedure he wasn't happy with the way that he looked. I think it's kind of unclear really, so at first it sounded to me as if he'd had like too much taken from the sides, but then the more that like I kind of understood it, it seems as though he wasn't happy with it straight away, because obviously surgeries take a long time to kind of settle down and stuff. So he wasn't happy with that side of things, so that was why he used to wear the eye patch, because he was covering like that part of his face where like there wasn't as much volume, I guess, as like he'd hoped for, or maybe there was too much volume because of swelling, I'm not really sure. But then as soon as that sort of went, he took off the eye patch and just like didn't have any sort of accoutrements on his face. I think people were kind of like, oh, like where's the eye patch sort of gone, but he was just wearing that out of necessity really. He did have some other hits and like musical endeavours. So in the 1990s he worked with a Eurodance duo that were called Sex Drive, and in the early 2000s as well he worked with Pet Shop Boys on a song that was called Jack and Jill. In terms of obviously his face and how he looked, so everybody knows Pete Burns for like very, very drastic sort of plastic surgery look. This was like years ago that I heard this. I was under the impression that he'd like taken a drawing that he did when he was younger to a surgeon. Oh, there goes the lid of that. And said like, this is what I want to look like, and then the surgeon had obviously like worked on him to create that. Maybe that is something that happened like during his sort of plastic surgery journey, but it seems as though like a large amount of the reason for Pete Burns' very sort of extreme look that he had, certainly in like the late 90s into, you know, like the rest of his life, it was because he'd had some botched surgery. So he'd gone to what he said in an interview was like the King of Lips in London, you know, like a really like well-known injector who I guess was like doing it for all the stars. I think it was on Harley Street, in fact, he said. The guy had like run out of the solution that he usually used, so he said, you know, we can use this other solution, it's just as good if not better, what do you think? And obviously like, I don't know, you sort of trust professionals, don't you? You think, oh, you know, they won't sort of harm me in any way, they won't be putting anything in there that's not meant to go in there, because, you know, it's their reputation and what have you. And basically the guy put something into his lips. I don't really know, I mean, from what I know about kind of lip injections and things, issues can happen anyway if you like, because you can like inject into an artery, is it an artery? Into like one of the veins basically, and that can cause issues with lip injections and things. So I know like that could be a reason for this, but it certainly seems odd to me that, you know, he's been having this same solution and that we're all hunky-dory, and then as soon as he has like this other one, there's issues, you know. I think he was performing at Heaven with Scissor Sisters, and he said that he like started to get like a weird pain in his like in his mouth and like in his lower sort of face, and you know, I mean, I guess like when you do have any sort of injections or anything or any cosmetic procedures done, you know, you're gonna feel a bit of discomfort. So he was like, oh, it'll be fine. And then as the night went on, he was like, yep, this isn't actually okay. He went to the doctors anyway, and they said, you know, like the tissue around had like started to rot around his mouth, and they basically said that the best thing to do would be to amputate the lips is that the right word for like if you take off somebody's lips? Is amputate only if it's a limb? Pete shopped around and found a surgeon that could do like reconstructive work on his face, which was in Italy. And I think he had like so many procedures over a course of 18 months. And you know, he had like a lot of issues whilst he was on the operating table and things. There were like a few sort of near misses in terms of like fatalities and things. Obviously, as well as that, you know, surgery isn't free, is it? So he like started to run into financial issues as well because of the surgeries that he was having to have and like how expensive they were. So when he came back from that, he then went into the Celebrity Big Brother house, which is kind of where I personally knew him from when I was younger. This looks absolutely nothing like Pete Burns' makeup, but I'm just hoping that I'll be able to do something with my hair that makes it a bit clearer that it's meant to be in. He most memorably had like a really big issue with Jodie Marsh, who was in there at the same time as him. And he, you know, he like coined the catchphrase, I guess, even though he only said it once, he said to her, "You're insincere to the point of nausea." He also, whilst there, made unlikely friends with a UK politician called George Galloway, and they kind of remained friends after the show as well. Does this nose look alright? Help me. Also, whilst he was in the Celebrity Big Brother house, there was like a massive controversy. So he had a fur coat, and he told the other contestants that it was a gorilla fur coat, and the coat ended up getting seized by authorities. Once they did do tests on it, it turned out that the fur was made from the colobus monkey, I think it's called. So with the gorilla fur, you have to have a license to own that fur, even though, you know, nobody really kind of should. But with the colobus monkey fur, you only needed it after the 1940s, and they thought that the coat had been imported in the 1930s, so you kind of got away with that. I'm hoping that just by adding this much highlighter it'll resolve my contouring, but I don't think it's gonna. So 2006 would appear to, you know, be quite the big year for Pete because he had a civil partnership to his partner Michael Simpson. They were allegations, I guess, of sort of violence and things, and Pete Burns did spend some time in jail because of that. There is a television show that was on Living TV, I think it was called something like, was it Celebrities Unspun or something? And basically it was like following him after being let out of jail. I think he'd been in there for 2 months, they were saying. And the weirdest part about that as well was, so in order for him to get out of prison, they had to like pay a bond, I think. George Galloway was going to be paying it, but I think he was in Colombia or something, they said, or maybe Brazil. But because he was there, like, and the money couldn't come fast enough, a fan ended up posting the bail for Pete, but that was under the condition that he would go and live with him for a while. So this TV show that I've watched, it like involves Pete going to live with this guy in, I can't remember where it was like some sort of seaside town, I think. And like Pete was just very like not happy to be there, and then the guy was very eccentric and kept like saying that Pete was his queen and like he would be Pete's king and stuff. And it was just all very odd what were going on. Like, I don't know, it seemed a bit, I just found it a bit strange as well it was filmed, which made me wonder, like, you know, maybe is this all like a bit set up for TV and stuff? Because again, like, Pete was still going through bankruptcy issues. In terms of other appearances, Pete was on Wife Swap as well. His partner, so Michael Simpson, he went and lived with a page 3 model who was called Leah Newman, and Pete lived with her husband, who was footballer Neil Ruddock. So I'm sure that you can guess like antics ensued. When that were another thing that I was going to mention. So obviously I was talking about kind of Pete's orientation and kind of like how he identified earlier. So there is a quote from him that I found. So he said, "People always want to know, am I gay, bi, trans or what? I say, forget all that. There's got to be a completely different terminology, and I'm not aware if it's been invented yet. I'm just Pete." I'm not sure when he said that. Obviously, you know, like we do have different terminologies and stuff now. Who knows if he would have felt that that sort of fitted, like where he felt that he like sat on the spectrum of sexuality and gender. But I do find it quite interesting that he was kind of so against like the binary or whatever. You know, in lots of interviews that I've seen with him, he says all the time, you know, I'm not interested in sort of labels in terms of his music, in terms of his fashion, and I guess in terms of like his personal life and like his gender and his orientations. Should they be bigger, do we think? Looking very demure, I think. I mean, to be fair, his makeup wasn't like wild, or he just had big features. So unfortunately we did lose Pete Burns on the 23rd of October 2016 to a heart attack. He had like many sort of near misses in terms of his health in the past. That was kind of a product of you know, him having to go under anaesthetic so much for all the procedures that he'd had, both in terms of like cosmetic and also like the reconstruction surgeries that he'd had. And then like quite a lot of the steroids that he was on, they'd given him like some blood clots and things, and unfortunately that eventually was the cause of his death. I think that he was 57 when he died, so that's really sad that, you know, he kind of went so young. But you know, he did certainly live his life to the absolute fullest from what I can tell. And it was quite interesting as well that Boy George ended up paying for his funeral expenses, because I'm guessing like he was still sort of experiencing some financial difficulties, even into like his later days. You know, him and Boy George had kind of been in a bit of a feud really because of their like paralleled careers, and like they shared some of the like same sort of aesthetic decisions and stuff. I mean, I don't know if that was like on purpose or if it was just, you know, obviously like if you are kind of an original in terms of how you look and stuff, which I feel like Pete Burns definitely was, then people are going to copy you, aren't they? But yeah, I just found that quite interesting that like they had like feuds and stuff, but he still paid for his funeral. So my makeup is now all done, and we're at the end of the story. I hope I've not got sweat patches. I don't. Excellent. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and try and like style my hair so then this looks a bit more like I'm meant to be Pete Burns, and put on a little outfit, and then I'll BRB. I'm back in my best approximation of Pete Burns in his Big Brother entrance look. I don't think that it's a million miles off, although the hair does sort of look a little bit just like it's sort of sat at the side of my head, but I do promise you that I pushed it forward and it's teetering a lot up there. It took me about 20 minutes to try and do this hair, which is a lot longer than I usually spend. Just something about it, isn't there, that's not quite right. But I feel like that's been this whole thing in terms of like, you know, trying to look like Pete Burns. You're a lot spikier on the top, wasn't it? Maybe if I was sort of right. That just makes it look right, so now it don't look anything like it. We've got a random clip in back of here as well that's holding it on. Don't look at back, because it's all else breaking loose back there. So I really hope that you did enjoy this video. As always, if you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. It would mean the world to me. And my social media will just be on at the very end. It's Dominoe Official on everything. So if you could please follow me on TikTok and Instagram, that would be fabulous. And until next time, I shall see you all very soon. Bye. I find you insincere to the point of nausea. That's not how he talks.